HighBridge, a division of recorded books, presents The JDC at 100, A Century of Humanitarianism, edited by Avinoam Patt, Atina Grossmann, Linda G. Levi, and Maud S. Mandel, read by Elizabeth Wiley. Forward. A JDC Archives colleague recently shared the following story. My great-grandfather, Isidor Simberg, was taken from his wife and daughter, my grandmother, in the Riga ghetto, and never heard from again. My father is named for the grandfather that he never met. But this tragic story has a happy ending. My grandmother and great-grandmother miraculously stuck together and survived 3 concentration camps. After the war, my great-grandmother Rosa worked for the Joint in Berlin, and on November 3, 1947, the two of them set sail from Bremen on the SS Marine Tiger with help from the Joint. The proof of that is in their listed destination on the ship's manifest. Joint, New York, New York. The Joint is a destination. The Joint is home. The Joint, in the end, is what made my family's life possible. I owe so much to the Joint, and I can only hope that I can repay that in some form as one of the custodians of our organization's history. These inspiring words and very touching personal story touch on the essence of JDC and what the organization has represented for so many over the last century. Established in reaction to a now renowned telegram sent by Henry Morgenthau, the U.S. ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, in August 1914, the Joint Distribution Committee for the Relief of War Sufferers was established to assist Jews in Europe and Palestine who were affected by the devastation of World War I. Jewish communities experienced calamity, revolutions, war, pogroms, and harsh poverty. It is difficult to imagine life for the Jewish communities in Poland, Romania, and Russia during World War I and in the interwar years without the extensive, life-affirming assistance provided by JDC. The Shoah and JDC are inextricably linked. This speaks to the history of JDC's heroic attempts to save as many Jews as possible from the clutches of the Nazis in Europe. JDC saved hundreds of thousands of lives in its tireless efforts to rescue Jews from Europe. The records of JDC document the lengths taken to find countries of refuge, raise funds, lease ships, guarantee passage, care, and maintenance, and offer relief assistance. From Cuba to Shanghai, from Barcelona and Lisbon to Tangier and the Dominican Republic, JDC offered rescue and refuge to hundreds of thousands. In the Displaced Persons (DP) camps of Europe and on the routes to these camps from across Eastern Europe, JDC was there to assist the survivors of the Shoah, the Holocaust, and to extend a helping hand and a smile. JDC was there to help DPs establish themselves in new countries. And along with the calamities seen by the Jewish people, there were moments of inspiration and rebirth. The establishment of the State of Israel and the rebuilding of Jewish communities in Europe in the post-war period offered hope and a future to the survivors. JDC worked closely with the fledgling government in Israel to develop services for the disadvantaged and sick, for the elderly, and for the handicapped. Indeed, JDC's imprint is found on the beginnings of many major social welfare institutions in Israel. In Europe, Africa, and Asia, JDC worked with local Jewish communities to improve the lot of the needy, the poor, and the sick, and helped establish communal institutions such as homes for the elderly, kindergartens, Jewish schools, social welfare programs, health clinics, and hospitals. JDC was the address for Jews who needed to leave their countries due to war and dislocation or for political reasons. It offered help to Hungarian Jews following the 1956 revolution, to Polish and Czech Jews in 1968, and to Soviet Jews who left the Soviet Union in the 1970s to the 1990s. And glasnost represented the opportunity to reconnect with Jews in the former Soviet Union. The last 100 years have been witness to much tragedy for world Jewry. Jewish communities have known calamity, revolutions, war, pogroms, and the Shoah, the Holocaust. Many Jews and others have benefited from the help provided by JDC around the world. Indeed, the organization's name became well known, legendary for generations of Jews. The Joint was a code word for hope, for help, the 911 of the Jewish people. In the contemporary period, JDC continues with its mission of rescue, relief, and renewal, caring for scores of thousands of survivors, working to rebuild and strengthen Jewish communal life where it had been all but extinguished, promoting innovation, and helping to strengthen Israel's social fabric. I was approached in 2012 by a young scholar, also inspired by the work of the Joint, who proposed the idea of planning a scholars' workshop to celebrate the centennial of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee's global activism and humanitarian aid, which would involve historians and scholars in the 100th anniversary celebrations of the Joint in 2014. The research of these scholars demonstrates the depth and breadth of the JDC Archives and the organization's past activities. By presenting the historical aspect of JDC, historians could speak to JDC's deep, unwavering commitment to helping Jews worldwide, irrespective of their background, even through the most challenging times. Thus was born the idea for the Scholars' Workshop that took place in September 2014 and brought together 25 scholars from around the world whose research focuses on the work of JDC. This two-day gathering in New York City, which was also attended by a group of key JDC leaders, was an inspiring and uplifting event, generating a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and excitement. The pre-distributed papers indeed pointed to the new research being done on JDC, bringing together JDC leaders and the scholars whose work focuses on the Joint and enabling the group to examine JDC as a whole. The presentations focused on the analysis of the work of JDC in different locales and in every decade over the last century. The discussions grappled with the challenges addressed by the Joint, the role of prominent JDC figures across regions, the lessons learned, and more. This encounter between JDC leadership and historians and scholars can help raise public awareness of JDC's incredible activism and foster new ideas for collaboration. The JDC Archives is one of the most important repositories of modern Jewish history, given the depth and breadth of the organization's activity, and is committed to encouraging and assisting scholars who wish to conduct research in its historic collections. Extensive digitization of the text, photo, and other collections over the last 8 to 9 years has made these records even more accessible to scholars and others wishing to conduct research. The JDC Archives website can be accessed at http://archives.jdc.org. I want to thank the steering committee of the Scholars' Workshop with whom I worked closely to plan the workshop and without whose leadership this workshop would not have happened. Atina Grossmann, Sarah Halpern, Maud Mandel, Avinoam Patt, and Judith Siegel. It has been a distinct honor to serve as an editor of this volume. It is our hope that this volume that brings together a group of the papers from this workshop will be a major contribution to university studies and to a general audience wishing to learn more about the work of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. Linda G. Levi, Director, JDC Global Archives. Introduction. Avinoam Patt, Atina Grossmann, Linda G. Levi, and Maud S. Mandel. Since its origins in 1914, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, JDC, founded to aid the victims of World War I, has played a significant role in preserving and sustaining Jewish life. As political upheaval across the globe uprooted centuries-old Jewish populations, forever changing the map of Jewish life, JDC supported refugees, helped rebuild devastated communities, and served as a global network for Jews cut off from their co-religionists through bloodshed and upheaval. The occasion of JDC's centennial in 2014, an event that active organizations usually treat as an occasion for celebration, reminiscence, and fundraising, also offered scholars who had been using the JDC Archives for their research without necessarily examining the institutional history documented in those archives as a specific object of research, an overdue ideal opportunity to reflect critically on the organization's transformative impact on Jewish communities throughout the world. In September 2014, 25 scholars from the United States, Western and Eastern Europe, Australia, and Israel came together to discuss JDC work across time and space. This volume draws upon select papers from that workshop and highlights innovative new research utilizing the unique and extensive resources of the JDC Archives. Given its origins in a first-time gathering of scholars devoted to the history of JDC, it offers only a partial geographical and chronological view of JDC's activities, mostly but not entirely focused on the turbulent decades between World War I, the impetus for its foundation, and the aftermath of World War II and the Holocaust. Nonetheless, this initial collection of scholarship, treating a wide range of topics, including relief operations for Jewish victims of pogroms and impoverishment after war, revolution, and civil conflict in the young Soviet Union, aid for refugees from National Socialism in Cuba, Shanghai, Tehran, the Dominican Republic, France, and Belgium, assistance to survivors for both rebuilding and emigration after the Holocaust in displaced persons DP camps in Allied-occupied Germany, Poland, Hungary, and the Soviet Union, and assistance in Rome and Vienna for Soviet Jewish transmigrants in the 1970s, underscores the global impact of the organization and the hitherto unknown aspects of its history. Our volume is intended as an incitement to further research and a demonstration of how much rich historical material the JDC Archives has to offer. Indeed, a second conference, held in 2017, and ongoing networks have already produced further contributions on Israel, North Africa, Latin and South America, and Southern Europe. Surely much more significant work will follow on activities in other parts of the world, the complex and sometimes contentious relationships with other international Jewish organizations and movements, and non-Jewish, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and governmental bodies. Indeed, despite the sustained transnational humanitarian work of this pioneering NGO over the past century of catastrophe and rebuilding in Jewish history, scholars have published surprisingly little devoted to the history and remarkable accomplishments of JDC. To be sure, thousands of scholars have made use of the valuable resources available in the JDC Archives, many of them newly available in digital format. Given the depth and breadth of JDC's work in over 90 countries around the world, these archives provide one of the most important repositories in the world for study of modern Jewish history. The archive's rich holdings include the text records of the organization from its beginnings in 1914 to the present, a large photograph collection with over 100,000 photographs of JDC's work over the last century, a library with over 6,000 volumes, and audiovisual recordings, including oral histories of longtime JDC staff and lay leaders. Included in the archives are eyewitness accounts and more analytical field reports, correspondence, ship lists, annual reports, and other publications, such as JDC digests, press releases, and interwar booklets on the organization's program in each country. These records are now accessible online via the JDC Archives website at http:// which also includes online exhibits, topic guides for educators, and a names index. The digital database is searchable to the item level. Yet despite the tremendous wealth of the archives, few scholars have comprehensively explored JDC's role on the ground, in a wide variety of regions and cultures and under dramatically differing circumstances, or critically assessed JDC's practices and impact over the past 100 years. This volume seeks to address those lacunae, not only by addressing the widespread impact of JDC, but also by showcasing the richness and depth of the JDC archives as a resource for examining crucial and understudied aspects of modern Jewish history, including global philanthropy, the interplay between local Jewish communities and the countries in which they live, the interwar and wartime campaigns for rescue and relief across Europe, the post-war reconstruction of ravaged Jewish communities, the role of JDC in Jewish migrations, and more. Certainly, JDC itself began early on the task of documenting this history by commissioning several works championing its efforts over the past century. In 1924, H. Alsberg was assigned as historian and prepared a History of JDC, covering the first 10 years of the organization. The Alsberg manuscript, 1926, was revised by Isaac Don Levine in 1927 and by Henry Bernstein in 1928. JDC privately published Evelyn Morrissey's Jewish Workers and Farmers in the Crimea and Ukraine, New York, 1937, based on her 4-week overseas trip to Ukraine and Crimea to observe the activities of the Agro Joint and the network of educational, economic, and social service institutions organized around farm settlements. This is detailed in the present volume by Michael Mitzel. After Morrissey decided to publish this book, JDC received the devastating news of the arrests of Agro Joint workers in 1937 and 1938. Indeed, many individuals mentioned in the book were arrested at that time in Stalin's Soviet Union. This probably contributed to a decision not to distribute Morrissey's book broadly once it was published. Joseph C. Hyman, Secretary and Executive Director of JDC, authored the encyclopedic 25 Years of American Aid to Jews Overseas, a record of the Joint Distribution Committee, New York, 1939, which was initially published as part of Volume 41 of the American Jewish Yearbook, published by the Jewish Publication Society and later revised for a new edition. As this brief overview suggests, works published on JDC's history have tended to fall into 4 main categories. 1. Those commissioned by JDC. 2. Those written by JDC activists. 3. Those that focus on JDC's prominent figures, for example, the biographies of Ralph Goldman and Joseph Schwartz. And 4. Those that focus on JDC's role in specific geographic areas. In addition, 2 volumes published in the early 1960s also addressed the work of the Joint more broadly. Historian Herbert Agar wrote The Saving Remnant, an account of Jewish survival, which covered JDC's work during World War I and the interwar years in the Pale of Settlement and Poland and the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany and its impact on Jews. Agar covered the Holocaust years and JDC's reconstruction activities as it helped rebuild Jewish communities in Europe, support the newly founded State of Israel, reach Jews behind the Iron Curtain, and assist Jews in the Muslim world. In addition, American historian Oscar Handlin authored A Continuing Task, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee 1914 to 1964 for the 50th anniversary of JDC, providing a shorter historical survey and analysis of the organization's humanitarian work and its impact during its first half-century. The first attempt to provide a full account of JDC's work over time was by Holocaust historian Yehuda Bauer. His 2 volumes, My Brother's Keeper, A History of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee 1929 to 1939, and American Jewry and the Holocaust, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee 1939 to 1945, have made major contributions to historical scholarship on the 20th century Jewish experience in general, and provide a rich and in-depth analysis of JDC's work from 1929 to 1945. Another book by Bauer, Flight and Rescue, Bricha, The Organized Escape of the Jewish Survivors of Eastern Europe, 1944 to 1948, covers JDC's role in the rescue efforts bringing Eastern European Jews from the vast graveyard of Europe after the Holocaust to DP camps in Allied-occupied Europe and then to Palestine prior to the establishment of the State of Israel. Out of the Ashes, the impact of American Jewry on post-Holocaust European Jewry also focuses extensively on JDC's role in post-war Europe. Although Bauer's work provided a much-needed overview of the significant contributions of JDC over time, the broad scope of these works left open many questions about JDC's activities in specific geographic areas and regarding its comparative impact over time and place. Following Bauer's sweeping account, more recent books by JDC employees and others have sought to fill in some of these gaps. Several volumes published in recent decades focus on the organization's work in one specific place or on a more specific topic, including volumes on JDC's work in the Soviet Union and the Dominican Republic, as well as newer biographies of key figures in the history of the Joint. This current volume seeks to build on these recent scholarly interventions that have examined JDC in context and to begin the work of analyzing in greater detail its strengths and weaknesses, the opportunities that its leadership seized and others that it missed, the multiple constraints JDC operatives faced, and the tremendous efforts to which they went to protect and bolster Jewish life across the globe. By providing in-depth analyses of JDC's efforts across time and space, we seek not only to fill in historiographical gaps, but also to provide new insight into Jewish communities and the countries in which they lived throughout the 20th century. JDC as a prism for studying modern Jewish history. As the essays in this book demonstrate, JDC and its archives offer a critical tool for understanding the last 100 years of Jewish history. Since its establishment in 1914, when Henry Morgenthau Sr., U.S. ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, cabled his friend Jacob Schiff in New York, asking him to raise funds for the Jews of Palestine, who had been cut off from support by the outbreak of war, JDC has been involved, in one way or another, in nearly every major world event over the last 100 years wherever Jewish communities in need could be found. As a result, the study of JDC activities provides insight into not only its myriad efforts to sustain Jewish life across the globe, but also 20th century Jewish history more broadly, including topics as diverse as the Jewish response to crisis and catastrophe, the growing role of American Jews on the world stage, the ways in which Jews interpreted the bonds of solidarity and peoplehood, and the functioning of Jewish communities in diverse political and social contexts. Analysis of the work of JDC thus illuminates much about the dynamic relationships between Jewish communities and the societies within which they lived and continually interacted, as well as the transnational global arena in which Jews moved and JDC operated. JDC's activities since 1914 also provide a lens onto Jewish responses to some of the most important historical events of the 20th century, including World War I, the aftermath of the Russian Revolution and Civil War, the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, the creation of independent republics in interwar Europe, the development of the Yishuv in Palestine under the British Mandate, the treatment of the Jewish minority in the USSR, the persecution of Jews in Nazi Germany, the outbreak of World War II, aid to Jews in German-occupied Europe, the flight of Jewish refugees in Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas, the post-war plight of ravaged European Jewish communities and the Jewish DPs, the rebuilding of Jewish communities in Europe following World War II, Jewish communities living in North Africa and other Muslim countries, the establishment of the State of Israel and mass migration to the new state, the persecution and migration of Jews from the USSR, the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, the war in Yugoslavia and the siege of Sarajevo, and continuing relief work during contemporary crises throughout the world, from Ukraine to the Middle East. Indeed, the 20th century has witnessed some of the most dramatic Jewish population shifts in history, greater than the expulsion from Spain, and as momentous as the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem and the beginning of the Jewish exile in the 1st century CE. In the face of this disruption, and as the essays in this volume document, JDC has played a pivotal role in assisting displaced Jews, aiding in migration, offering assistance to refugees, and providing support for the rebuilding of dislocated communities. Even before the European Jewish Center was destroyed, mass migration westward from Eastern Europe, across Europe and reaching the Americas, began to alter the Jewish map significantly. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, and with near annihilation of European Jewry, the creation of the State of Israel led to mass migration and expulsions of centuries-old Jewish communities from the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. In the last decades of the 20th century, many of the remaining Jewish communities of the former Soviet Union relocated to Israel and North America. Although this volume provides little direct analysis of Jewish settlement in Israel, given its major focus on the tensions between migration and relief and reconstruction at home in Europe, or in far-flung refugee destinations, as well as tensions between JDC's central base in the United States and its work on the ground in vastly diverse Jewish communities, JDC projects in Israel are certainly deserving of their own separate analysis. The essays in this volume nevertheless trace the shifting, sometimes conflict-ridden relationship of JDC to settlement in Palestine and Zionist movements, just as with other strands of the global Jewish community, for example, Sephardic communities or Orthodoxy, especially in the pieces by Craigo Schneider and Patt on the DP camps, Grossmann on Iran, Glaser on Cuba and Shanghai, and Wexler on JDC support for refugees from the Soviet Union who chose not to emigrate to Israel in the 1970s. By examining JDC's successes and failures in the context of these dramatically shifting political situations, from revolution through war and into the post-World War II period, we begin to see JDC as a transnational and yet essentially American institution trying to negotiate with foreign powers, as well as Jewish organizations and multiple Jewish constituencies, to provide as much useful and practical aid as possible in various crisis situations.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?